Each year, intelligence agencies across the globe document thousands of classified incidents involving experimental biological weapons programs that push far beyond the ethical boundaries established by the Geneva Protocol of 1925 and the Biological Weapons Convention of 1972. Programs that operate in underground facilities where genetic modification technology meets military ambition in ways that would horrify even the most hardened warfare strategists. It happens so frequently that specialized counter-proliferation units within the Defense Intelligence Agency, South Korea's National Intelligence Service, and the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs maintain dedicated task forces with combined annual budgets exceeding $800 million specifically to monitor and neutralize biological threats emerging from rogue state programs, particularly those involving CRISPR gene editing technology that has been weaponized in laboratories hidden beneath mountains, deserts, and the most heavily fortified borders on Earth. The Korean Demilitarized Zone stretches 250 kilometers across the peninsula as a 4-kilometer-wide buffer containing over 1 million active landmines and representing the most heavily militarized border in human history, where an estimated 1.2 million North Korean soldiers and 600,000 South Korean troops face each other across razor wire and concrete barriers, creating an environment where secret military installations can exist mere kilometers from the border, buried so deep underground that even satellite thermal imaging cannot detect the horrifying experiments being conducted in hermetically sealed laboratories lit by fluorescent lights that never distinguish day from night. For a brief period during March of 2023, one elite 8-man team from the Republic of Korea's 707th Special Mission Battalion would infiltrate one of these hidden research facilities and encounter something so profoundly disturbing and biologically impossible that it would result in the complete incineration of a multi-million-dollar underground complex. The immediate classification of all mission records under cosmic-level secrecy, and the establishment of specific coordinates along the DMZ, where South Korean rapid response units maintain 24-hour readiness with thermobaric weapons authorization for any biological signature detected within a 15-kilometer radius. But what exactly was the genetically modified horror that North Korean scientists had created in their desperate attempt to develop the perfect infiltration weapon? And why did 3 highly trained Special Forces operators choose to die burning alive in an underground inferno rather than allow themselves to transform into something that was no longer remotely human? The Korean Demilitarized Zone spans approximately 907 square kilometers of territory that has remained largely untouched by human development since the Armistice Agreement of July 27, 1953, creating an accidental nature preserve where endangered species thrive amidst the rusted tanks and unexploded ordnance. But more importantly, creating a landscape so riddled with surveillance blind spots, underground tunnel networks, and geological anomalies that both North and South Korea have exploited these gaps to construct secret facilities that officially do not exist on any military map or intelligence database. The terrain along the central sector near the Punch Bowl area consists of steep granite ridges rising to elevations of 1,100 meters, covered in dense mixed forests of Korean pine and oak that remain impenetrable to ground observation, with soil compositions rich in iron ore that create natural electromagnetic interference capable of disrupting drone surveillance and satellite communications, while the underlying bedrock contains extensive natural cave systems formed over millennia that the North Koreans have expanded into vast subterranean complexes connected by tunnels extending 15 to 20 kilometers beyond the northern boundary of the DMZ. The climate in this region fluctuates between brutal winters where temperatures plummet to minus 20 degrees Celsius and humid summers exceeding 35 degrees, creating an environment where exposed human skin can suffer frostbite in minutes during winter months or heat exhaustion within hours during summer operations, while the spring months bring dense morning fog that can reduce visibility to less than 10 meters, providing perfect cover for covert movements across the heavily mined buffer zone. It is perhaps unsurprising, then, that this militarized wilderness where nature and warfare have created a landscape of perpetual tension, concealed surveillance, and layers upon layers of deadly secrets buried beneath innocent-looking hillsides, would become the location where humanity's arrogance in manipulating the fundamental building blocks of life would manifest in a form so perfectly adapted to infiltrate, infest, and ultimately consume its creators. Ancient Korean shamanic traditions dating back over 2,000 years contain warnings about what they called Byeol-ryong, which translates to bee spirits or wasp demons, described in texts from the Goguryeo kingdom period as malevolent entities that would enter the bodies of warriors during battle and consume them from within, with historical accounts from the Samguk Sagi Chronicles written in 1145 CE, describing a military campaign near what is now the DMZ region, where General Kim Yusin's forces encountered enemy soldiers who moved as if possessed by something other than their own souls, soldiers whose bodies erupted with swarms of stinging shadows after being struck down in combat, leading Buddhist monks to perform purification rituals involving mass cremations to prevent what they believed was a form of spiritual parasitism from spreading to nearby villages. Japanese colonial medical records from 1938 contain peculiar case studies from Unit 731 Satellite Research Station near Kaesong, where Imperial Army doctors documented experiments involving the deliberate infestation of Korean prisoners with parasitic wasps of the family Ichneumonidae, noting in their meticulous laboratory journals that subject K-47 displayed remarkable behavioral alterations in the 72 hours preceding larval emergence, including photophobia, increased aggression toward non-infested subjects, and attempts to relocate to elevated concealed spaces despite severe physical trauma. With the attending physician, Dr. Ishii's protege, Lieutenant Nakamura Kenji, writing in his personal diary dated August 3, 1938, that the infected prisoners appear to retain human consciousness until approximately 18 hours before emergence, at which point something fundamental changes in their eyes as if the person inside has already died, and what remains is merely flesh serving a new master. South Korea's National Intelligence Service maintains classified archives containing at least 9 separate incidents between 1995 and 2022 involving North Korean defectors who died under mysterious circumstances within weeks of crossing the border, deaths that were publicly attributed to malnutrition, disease, or suicide, but which internal autopsy reports described as biological anomalies inconsistent with any known pathology, with the most disturbing case from 2018 involving a former North Korean Army lieutenant named Ri Myung-hun, who was found dead in his protective custody apartment in Seoul with his torso cavity completely hollowed out from the inside, the autopsy revealing what the medical examiner described as boreholes consistent with systematic consumption by multiple organisms, though no organisms were recovered from the body, suggesting they had already completed their life cycle and departed. Similar patterns emerged in intercepted communications from Chinese border guards stationed along the Yalu River in 2019, where People's Liberation Army reports documented several incidents of North Korean citizens attempting to cross into China while exhibiting severely altered mental states and visible subcutaneous movement beneath facial skin, with one particularly detailed report describing how Border Patrol officers were forced to incinerate 3 defectors who became violently defensive when approached as if protecting something within their own bodies, and whose remains, when examined by PLA medical personnel, contained evidence of organized parasitic activity involving multiple puncture sites along the spine and base of the skull. The pattern that emerges from these scattered, heavily redacted intelligence reports suggests something profoundly disturbing: that North Korea's biological weapons program had been conducting human trials for decades, that these experiments had occasionally resulted in subjects escaping containment and attempting to flee across borders, while already serving as living incubators for something that should not exist in nature, and that multiple governments had been quietly monitoring this nightmare, while maintaining public silence, waiting and watching to see if the Democratic People's Republic would lose control of its creation, before international intervention became absolutely necessary to prevent a biological catastrophe that could spread far beyond the Korean peninsula. March 14, 2023, 21:45 hours. The 8-man infiltration team from the 707th Special Mission Battalion crossed the northern boundary of the DMZ under cover of dense fog and moonless darkness, led by Captain Kang Jae-sung, call sign Doka Ebi, Goblin, a 17-year veteran of special operations whose service record included 3 classified missions into North Korean territory and whose reputation for maintaining ice-cold composure under pressure had earned him command of this particular operation, despite the fact that even he had expressed serious reservations during the final briefing 48 hours earlier. The team consisted of Lieutenant Han Soo-won, Bulgi, Fire Dog, the unit's demolitions expert whose compact frame concealed terrifying proficiency with explosives, Sergeant First Class Park Min-jae, Medeup, not, the team's primary medic whose steady hands had saved 4 lives during a botched extraction in 2021, Sergeant Baek Tae-hyun Harangi, Tiger, the designated marksman whose kill count remained classified, but was rumored to exceed 40 confirmed targets, Corporal Lee Dong-min Guishin, Ghost, the youngest member at 23 whose talent for electronic warfare and signals intelligence had fast-tracked his assignment to the 707th, Corporal Kim Hyun-woo Agui, Demon, combat specialist whose brutal efficiency in hand-to-hand combat made even his own teammates uncomfortable, Corporal Choi Sung-min Nakseon, fishing line, the communications expert whose ability to maintain radio contact in impossible conditions had proven invaluable on previous operations. And finally, Corporal Min Jae-won Seulgi, Wisdom, the team's intelligence analyst and Korean to Chinese translator, whose photographic memory allowed him to recall tactical maps and documents with perfect accuracy. They had entered through a ventilation shaft located exactly where Dr. Han Sung-chul, the 46-year-old defector and former senior researcher at the Kangi Military Research Institute, had indicated during his debriefing 3 weeks earlier, the man's hands trembling so violently as he drew the facility layout that Captain Kang had needed to steady the pen himself, noting with concern the raised scar tissue at the base of Han's neck, approximately 3 centimeters in diameter, which the doctor had unconsciously touched every few minutes as if checking to ensure something was no longer there. The descent through the ventilation shaft had taken 11 minutes of careful rappelling down a vertical tunnel that reeked of rust and something organic that none of them could quite identify. A sickly sweet smell reminiscent of rotting fruit mixed with the metallic tang of old blood until they finally emerged into a concrete corridor, bathed in the dim red glow of emergency lighting that cast everything in the color of dark arterial blood. The silence struck them immediately. Not the natural silence of an abandoned facility, but rather the complete absence of any mechanical sound whatsoever. No humming of ventilation systems, no distant generators, no electronic buzz from overhead lights, just an oppressive quiet broken only by the sound of their own controlled breathing through tactical masks and the soft rustle of their gear. While the temperature read a constant 12 degrees Celsius on their equipment, displays cold enough to see their breath, but not cold enough to explain why Corporal Lee felt his skin prickling with goosebumps beneath his tactical suit. Captain Kang raised his fist in the standard halt signal as the team's thermal imaging scopes detected the first anomaly. Deep gouges in the concrete walls running in parallel sets of 3, each groove approximately 1 centimeter deep and carved with enough force to expose the rebar reinforcement beneath. The scratch patterns extending from floor level up to the ceiling, in irregular climbing patterns that suggested something large and strong, had moved through this corridor with enough urgency to literally claw its way along the walls. And when Sergeant Park ran his gloved fingers along one of the deeper gouges, he noted aloud through the tactical radio that whatever made these marks was moving fast, probably panicking, and these scratches are fresh, maybe 2 to 3 weeks old, right around the time this place was supposedly evacuated. The first signs of evacuation became apparent as they advanced deeper into the facility. A security door stood wedged open with what appeared to be a metal filing cabinet jammed into the frame as if someone had desperately needed to prevent the door from closing and sealing them inside. Scattered documents covered the floor in drifts like snow, many of them bearing official North Korean military stamps and classification markings that Corporal Min began photographing with his helmet camera. Dried bloodstains painted the walls and floor in abstract patterns that suggested multiple bleeding individuals had moved through this space, though what disturbed Lieutenant Han most was that several of these blood trails didn't lead to exits or hiding places, but instead terminated directly beneath ceiling-mounted ventilation grates. It's as if the injured parties had somehow climbed straight up the walls and disappeared into the ductwork above. Then Corporal Choi, who had been monitoring the team's rear security, turned his weapon-mounted light toward the ceiling directly above their formation, and everyone froze at what the beam revealed. A blood trail that started at chest height on the wall ascended in a diagonal path across the ceiling itself, leaving handprints and smear marks that suggested someone had been crawling across the overhead surface in defiance of gravity, and terminated at a ventilation grate that hung partially detached from its mounting. The metal grill bent outward from the inside as if tremendous force had been applied to widen the opening. And through that darkened gap, something reflected their lights back at them for just a fraction of a second. A multifaceted gleam like polished obsidian or compound before whatever it was retreated deeper into the darkness with a sound that Captain Kang would later describe in his debriefing as not quite a buzz. Not quite a hiss, but something that made my back teeth ache and my inner ear feel like it was vibrating. The team advanced with weapons raised toward what their briefing had identified as Laboratory Complex 3. Their night vision equipment casting everything in shades of phosphorescent green. But as they approached the laboratory's blast door, which stood inexplicably open, despite being designed to seal automatically during any containment breach, Sergeant Bayek reported through the radio net that his thermal scope was detecting something wrong with the temperature gradient in that room. It's reading cold spots that move, like pockets of air that are 8 to 10 degrees colder than ambient, and they're moving in circular patterns like they're patrolling. The laboratory itself proved to be a scene of systematic destruction mixed with disturbing precision. Expensive CRISPR gene sequencing equipment worth millions of dollars lay smashed on the floor. Monitors shattered and keyboards torn from their consoles with enough violence to rip mounting bolts from solid steel tables. Yet arranged in the center of the room in almost reverential formation were 7 electron microscopes that remained completely intact and still powered on. Their displays showing the final images that had been under observation. Magnified cross-sections of what appeared to be insect larvae, penetrating through striated muscle tissue, with specialized mouthparts that looked less like natural mandibles, and more like precisely engineered surgical instruments designed to separate muscle fibers without triggering massive trauma response. What dominated the laboratory space, however, were the shattered remains of what had clearly been containment apparatus. 3 cylindrical chambers constructed of reinforced glass at least 5 centimeters thick, each one approximately 2 meters tall and 1 meter in diameter, now reduced to glittering fragments scattered across the floor in patterns that suggested the glass had been broken from the inside with coordinated simultaneous force. And when Corporal Lee knelt to examine the interior of one destroyed chamber, his helmet light illuminated the remains of what had been a sophisticated environmental control system, temperature regulators, humidity sensors, and most disturbingly, an automated feeding mechanism with input tubes that connected to sealed containers labeled in Korean as nutrient source human tissue samples. The walls of the laboratory bore evidence of what Dr. Han had described in his debriefing as the moment everything went wrong. Scorch marks from what appeared to be emergency sterilization protocols that had been activated, char patterns on the ceiling indicating that flame-based containment systems had fired. Yet the destruction had continued regardless, with additional damage showing that something had survived the flames and proceeded to systematically destroy every computer terminal and recording device except for one hardened military-grade server that Corporal Lee immediately identified and began accessing with his portable decryption equipment. While the team established a defensive perimeter, Lee worked feverishly to extract data from the damaged server, his fingers moving across the portable keyboard with increasing urgency as file after file revealed themselves, and what he began reading aloud over the tactical net caused even Captain Kang's professional composure to crack visibly. Test logs documenting genetic modification of Ichneumonidae family wasps, using CRISPR technology to enhance size, aggression, reproductive speed, and most horrifying, introducing genes from parasitic fungi and certain species of behavior-modifying parasites that allowed the modified wasps to exert chemical control over their hosts' nervous systems. Video files showing test subjects, first pigs, then dogs, then primates, and finally human prisoners, all displaying the same progression of behavioral changes after being stung and implanted with larvae. Detailed anatomical studies showing how the modified larvae would position themselves along the spine and at the base of the skull to maximize neural control while feeding on non-essential organs first, to keep the host alive and mobile for as long as possible. And perhaps most chilling, a final report dated February 18, 2023, just 3 weeks earlier, signed by senior researcher Han Sung-chul himself, describing Test Subject 51, a male human prisoner who had successfully gestated 6 viable specimens and whose behavior in the final 18 hours had shown complete subordination to larval needs, including self-defensive aggression toward research staff, attempting to extract samples suggesting full neural colonization had been achieved. The temperature in the laboratory dropped suddenly by 4 degrees, registered simultaneously on every team member's equipment, and in that same instant, every man heard it. A sound that started at the very edge of human hearing, a high-pitched oscillation around 17,000 hertz that made their sinuses ache and their teeth feel like they were vibrating in their sockets. A frequency that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, emanating from the walls themselves, the ceiling, the floor, the very air around them. Sergeant Park's medical training immediately identified the sensation as acoustic trauma. That frequency is deliberately chosen. It's right at the range that causes maximum discomfort in humans, causes nausea, disorientation, and panic. This isn't natural. This is designed. This is a defense mechanism. The sound intensified, and with it came the first visual confirmation. Corporal Kim, who had been examining one of the shattered containment chambers, shouted a warning and dove backward as something emerged from the debris, something that caught the light and reflected it in shimmering iridescent patterns of deep crimson and black. It was a wasp, but calling it merely a wasp would be like calling a tiger merely a cat. The creature measured at least 5 centimeters from head to stinger, its body armored in chitinous plates of black exoskeleton, striped with markings of deep arterial red that seemed to pulse with bioluminescence. Its wings nearly transparent but reinforced with veins of darker material that produced that nauseating hum as they beat at speeds too fast for the human eye to follow. And its head? Oh God. Its head featured compound eyes that seemed far too large and far too aware eyes that tracked their movements with obvious intelligence, while mandibles the size of a grown man's thumbnail opened and closed with audible clicking sounds as if the creature was tasting their scent on the air and finding it acceptable. Before anyone could react, the wasp launched itself directly at Corporal Lee Dongmin's position, moving with such speed that it appeared as a blur of red and black. But Lee's reflexes, honed by countless hours of training, caused him to jerk backward just enough that the creature missed his exposed neck, and instead impacted his shoulder armor with enough force to actually produce an audible thump against the tactical plate. The wasp's stinger scraping across the ballistic material in a shower of sparks before the insect banked away and disappeared back into the shadows with a sound like ripping silk. Contact. Hostile biological. Captain Kang's voice cut through the radio net with perfect command authority, despite the situation spiraling into nightmare territory. All personnel weapons free aim for... But his order was cut short as the walls, the ceiling, the very shadows themselves seemed to come alive with movement. Dozens of those same red-striped wasps emerging from ventilation grates, from gaps in the shattered containment chambers, from crevices in the damaged equipment, each one producing that same tooth-aching frequency that combined into a symphony of pain that made concentration nearly impossible. The swarm moved with disturbing coordination, not like individual insects, but like a single distributed organism, with one collective intelligence guiding every movement. Some wasps flew directly at the team members in aggressive attack patterns, forcing them to duck and dodge while trying to maintain weapon discipline in the confined space. Others systematically attacked their equipment, landing on weapon-mounted lights and using their powerful mandibles to shear through the mounting brackets, plunging sections of the laboratory into darkness. Still others seemed to be defending specific areas, hovering in formations that blocked access to corridors and doorways, as if herding the team exactly where the swarm wanted them to go. Sergeant Bayek managed to get his weapon raised and fired a controlled 3-round burst at one of the attacking wasps, the suppressed gunfire producing sharp cracks in the enclosed space. And incredibly, impossibly, the insect dodged, its compound eyes apparently capable of detecting the weapon's aim, and its flight speed sufficient to alter trajectory mid-flight. Though one round clipped its wing and sent it spiraling into a wall where it impacted with enough force to leave a visible dent in the concrete. The wounded wasp twitching violently before 2 other specimens descended on it, and in a display of pragmatic horror that made Corporal Min's stomach lurch, began systematically dismembering their injured companion and carrying the pieces back into the ventilation system. Lieutenant Han produced a compact incendiary grenade from his tactical vest and was preparing to activate it when Captain Kang grabbed his wrist. "No, we need samples, we need evidence, and we can't risk bringing this whole facility down on top of us." And in that moment of hesitation, while the team was distracted by the swarm's frontal assault, 3 wasps detached from the main group and dove with predatory precision toward Corporal Lee, who had been focused on downloading data from the server and hadn't seen them approaching from above and behind. Their flight path calculated to bypass his peripheral vision entirely, and by the time Sergeant Park screamed a warning, it was already too late. The first wasp striking Lee at the base of his skull with such force that it knocked his helmet askew, the creature's stinger, a wickedly serrated appendage nearly 2 centimeters long, punching through the thin fabric of his tactical collar and penetrating the soft tissue at the top of his spine with a sound like a knife stabbing into raw meat. Lee's scream was instantaneous and primal, a sound of pure animal terror and pain that cut through every tactical frequency, and he stumbled forward, his hands clawing at his neck trying to dislodge the creature. But the wasp had already completed its purpose, the stinger withdrawing with a wet sucking sound as the insect launched itself away before anyone could swat it. And in the half second that the stinger had been embedded, Lee's body had received something, some payload, some terrible gift that was now inside him, working its way deeper into his nervous. The swarm, as if satisfied that their objective had been achieved, suddenly disengaged, the wasps retreating en masse back into the ventilation system with a sound like a squadron of miniature fighter jets departing a carrier deck, their humming fading but never quite disappearing entirely, leaving behind only the team's ragged breathing, the smell of gun smoke, and something else. Something sweet and organic like overripe fruit rotting in summer heat, and Corporal Lee Dongmin kneeling on the floor with both hands pressed against his neck, blood seeping between his fingers, looking up at Captain Kang with eyes that were already beginning to show the first signs of what was growing inside him. Pupils dilated far too wide for the available light, a faint tremor in his eyelids, and an expression that mixed human fear with something else, something that wasn't quite Lee anymore, something that was listening to signals his human consciousness couldn't yet interpret. Sergeant Park moved immediately to Lee's position, his medic's instincts overriding the horror of what he'd just witnessed, and as he carefully pulled Lee's hands away from the wound site, what he saw made his professionally trained composure crack for the first time in his 8-year career. The puncture wound itself was relatively small, perhaps 5 millimeters in diameter, but the tissue surrounding it had already begun to change, the skin turning a deep purple-black in a circular pattern spreading outward from the entry point. And beneath the discolored skin, something was moving, subtle undulations that suggested whatever had been injected was already burrowing deeper, following nerve pathways toward the spine and brainstem. "Sir, system. Sir, I need to extract whatever was deposited. I need to do it now before it gets any deeper." Lee Park's voice carried the edge of barely controlled panic as he reached for his field surgical kit. But even as he spoke, Lee's hand shot up with surprising speed and gripped Park's wrist with enough strength to make the medic wince. And when Lee spoke, his voice sounded wrong, too calm, too level, completely at odds with what should have been agonizing pain. Don't touch it. It doesn't hurt anymore. Actually, it feels warm, like it's supposed to be there." The team exchanged glances of mounting dread because they'd all heard Lee's helmet camera recording of the server data. They'd all heard what happened to hosts in the hours following implantation, and Captain Kang made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. We continue the mission, we collect the evidence we came for, and we get Lee out of here to proper medical facilities on our side of the border. We move fast, we move quiet, and we do not engage unless absolutely necessary. They secured Lee's wound with field dressings, though Park quietly informed the captain through a private channel that the dressings won't help. Whatever's inside him is already past the point where surface treatment matters. We'd need to do spinal surgery in a sterile environment, and even then, I don't know if we could get it all out. But they had no choice except to hope that speed would be enough, that they could extract in time, that modern South Korean medical technology could somehow counteract North Korean biological warfare engineering. The team moved deeper into the facility following the layout that Dr. Han had provided, heading toward what intelligence had identified as the primary research director's office. where the most classified documentation would be stored, but with every corridor they traversed, they found more evidence of the chaos that had consumed this place. Barricades constructed from office furniture that had been torn apart, as if whatever attacked them had possessed strength far beyond what any insect should have. Drag marks and dried blood where bodies had been pulled toward ventilation shafts, the trails ending at grates that showed signs of having been bent and widened from the inside. And in one particularly disturbing discovery, at a security station where 3 North Korean guards still sat at their posts, or rather, what remained of them sat there, because each corpse bore the same horrifying evidence of what had happened in their final moments. The bodies were desiccated, dried out like Egyptian mummies despite having been dead for only 3 weeks, their skin pulled tight over bones, their uniforms hanging loose on frames that had lost perhaps 40% of their original body mass, and each corpse bore multiple exit wounds, circular holes approximately 2 centimeters in diameter punched through their backs, their shoulders, their necks, places where something had eaten its way out from the inside, and the expressions frozen on their withered faces spoke of awareness of consciousness persisting long enough to know what was happening to them. Mouths locked open in silent screams, eyes wide with the knowledge that they were being consumed by something they themselves were protecting. Corporal Min, whose job required him to document everything, was photographing one of the corpses when he noticed something that made him stumble backward with a strangled gasp. One of the bodies had a name tag still pinned to its uniform jacket, and the name read, Lieutenant Han Sung-chul. But that couldn't be right because Han Sung-chul was the defector who had briefed them, the man who had provided the intelligence that led them here. Except this corpse wore a military uniform while their Dr. Han had been a civilian researcher. And when Min reported this discrepancy over the radio, ice water flooded his veins because it meant either they'd been sent after the wrong facility or their intelligence source had lied about his identity, and either possibility suggested a level of deception that had potentially walked them straight into a trap. The situation deteriorated catastrophically when they reached the research director's office and found it already occupied. A figure sat at the desk with its back to the door, motionless, wearing what appeared to be a North Korean scientist's white laboratory coat, stained with dried blood and other fluids. And as the team's lights illuminated the room, the figure slowly, mechanically, turned to face them, and what they saw would feature in every team member's nightmares for years to come. It had been human once, perhaps 12 to 18 hours ago based on the progression documented in the files, but now it existed in that terrible transition state between person and incubator. The face was still recognizable, still possessed human features, but the expression was completely gone, replaced by a slack emptiness like a mannequin, eyes open but not seeing, not in any way that suggested consciousness or awareness, just vacant biological cameras recording, but no longer processing. The skin across the figure's neck, shoulders, and upper back had transformed into something that resembled a massive bruise. Deep, purple-black tissue stretched tight over what were clearly large masses moving beneath the surface. Undulations that rose and fell with a rhythm that had nothing to do with breathing or heartbeat. And as the team watched in paralyzed horror, one of those masses moved upward, traveling beneath the skin toward the base of the skull, and the skin bulged outward, stretching impossibly thin until they could see through it, could see the larval form inside, white and segmented and far too large to have possibly fit through the puncture wound that had introduced it, meaning it had grown, had fed, had consumed so much of its host's internal tissue to fuel its own grotesque metamorphosis. Jesus Christ, it's still alive, the host is still alive. Sergeant Bayek's voice cracked with horror, and indeed, they could see shallow respiration, could see the chest rising and falling, could see blood pressure pulsing in what remained of normal tissue, meaning this walking corpse retained just enough autonomic function to keep the meat fresh for its passengers, and that was somehow more horrifying than if the person had simply died. The figure rose from the chair with movements that were wrong, too stiff, too angular, like a marionette being manipulated by an amateur puppeteer, and it took 3 stumbling steps toward them before Captain Kang raised his weapon and fired a single shot directly into the figure's forehead, the suppressed gunshot producing a sharp crack and a spray of dried blood and withered tissue, and the body collapsed immediately, no longer animated by whatever neural hijacking had kept it mobile. But as it hit the floor, The skin of its back split open like overripe fruit, and what emerged made every man in that room forget their training, forget their discipline, forget everything except the biological imperative to flee. 6 wasps crawled out from the gaping wound, each one covered in viscous fluid and membrane tissue. But within seconds of emerging, they began to clean themselves with rapid movements of their legs, the fluid evaporating with unnatural speed. And these specimens were noticeably larger than the ones that had attacked earlier, each measuring close to 7 centimeters in length, their coloring even more vivid, their movements even more coordinated, and most horrifying of all, they didn't attack immediately, instead forming a defensive circle around the corpse of their former host, as if protecting it, as if it still had value to them. And the intelligence in their compound eyes was undeniable as they studied the 8 armed men, clearly calculating, clearly planning their next move with a level of strategic thinking that no insect should possess. Then, as if responding to some silent signal, the 6 wasps launched themselves in perfect synchronization, not at the armed soldiers but at the ceiling, their powerful wings carrying them straight up where they disappeared into an air vent. And in the silence that followed, every man understood the terrible truth. The facility hadn't been evacuated because of containment failure. It had been evacuated because containment had succeeded too well, because what they'd created here had worked exactly as designed, had proven itself as the perfect biological weapon by systematically converting its creators into mobile incubators. And now those perfected specimens were loose in a facility that connected via underground tunnels to God knows how many other locations. And the team had just announced their presence by firing weapons, and somewhere in the darkness above them, in those endless miles of ventilation shafts and access tunnels, hundreds of those red and black nightmares were now converging on their position, drawn by the sound of gunfire, drawn by the warmth of living flesh, drawn by the irresistible opportunity to spread their terrible gift to 8 new hosts who would eventually wander back across the border to South Korea, to Seoul, to anywhere with sufficient population density to sustain an exponential growth curve that would consume the entire Korean peninsula within a month. Captain Kang's tactical mind immediately shifted into crisis management mode, his 17 years of experience forcing rational thought through the primal terror that threatened to overwhelm even his iron discipline, and he began issuing orders with clipped military precision. Buljai, seal that vent with whatever you can, buy us 30 seconds. Horangji, cover our 6. Maydiap, check Lee's vitals now. Everyone else, we're moving to a defensible position. Standard breach formation. Move, move, move. Lieutenant Han pulled a shaped breaching charge from his demolitions kit, slapped it against the vent opening where the wasps had disappeared and triggered a 3-second fuse that produced a sharp concussive blast and sent molten thermite cascading into the ductwork, temporarily sealing the opening with superheated metal that glowed orange-white in the darkness, buying them precious seconds, but also announcing their exact location to anything with functioning sensory organs within a 100-meter radius. Sergeant Park had Corporal Lee pressed against the wall medical scanner running over the puncture site, and what the device's display showed made his hands shake as he reported through the tactical net. Sir, the implanted material has already reached his C3 and C4 vertebrae. It's branched into multiple segments, each approximately 2 millimeters in diameter. Following his spinal nerve pathways, his body temperature has elevated to 38.1 Celsius, and his neurological readings are showing abnormal activity in the amygdala and hypothalamus consistent with the behavioral modification documented in those test files. Lee himself remained eerily calm throughout the examination, his head tilted slightly to one side as if listening to something the others couldn't hear. And when Park asked him standard concussion protocol questions, his name, his unit, the current date, Lee answered correctly but with notable delays, as if he had to consciously remember information that should have been automatic, as if something else was now occupying processing power in his brain, learning how his nervous system worked, mapping the neural pathways it would soon control completely. Captain Kang attempted to establish communication with their tactical operations center back across the DMZ, keying his encrypted radio and speaking the authentication codes that should have immediately connected him to command. But all he received was static, not the natural white noise of radio interference, but rather a pulsing, rhythmic static that seemed to match the frequency of that nauseating hum the wasps produced, as if the swarm was somehow generating acoustic interference specifically tuned to disrupt their communications equipment. Corporal Choi, their communications specialist, immediately began diagnostic protocols, checking frequencies, boosting signal strength, attempting to punch through whatever was blocking them. But every channel he tried produced the same result. That oscillating static punctuated by sounds that were almost but not quite like human speech. Syllables that formed no known language, as if the interference itself was trying to communicate or perhaps mock their attempts to call for help. "Sir, this isn't natural interference, this is active jamming. But the signature doesn't match any known electronic warfare system. It's organic somehow. It's like the swarm is producing this collectively, using their bodies and wing frequencies to create a standing acoustic wave that disrupts radio transmission." Choi's voice carried the frustration of a specialist encountering something that violated every principle of his training, and the implications were staggering because it meant the wasps weren't just biologically modified predators. They were a distributed weapons system with electronic warfare capabilities built into their very physiology. Corporal Min, whose analytical mind continued functioning even as terror threatened to overwhelm him, had been examining the data he downloaded from the laboratory server, scrolling through files on his portable display, and what he found made him interrupt the captain's attempted communication. "Sir, you need to see this. There's a facility schematic here that doesn't match what Dr. Han gave us. There are 3 additional sub-levels below us that weren't on our briefing maps. And according to this document dated February 20th, just 2 days after the containment breach, someone activated the emergency bioweapon dispersal protocol, which according to this technical manual means they deliberately vented the primary containment chambers into the facility's air circulation system. The implications hit every man simultaneously. If the North Koreans had intentionally released the swarm rather than trying to contain it, that meant either they'd completely lost control and decided to destroy all evidence, including their own personnel, or worse, this had been a deliberate test, a live-fire exercise using their own scientists and soldiers as test subjects to see how effectively the wasps could convert an entire facility's population into mobile incubators. And either scenario meant that extraction was no longer their primary concern, because they were now inside an active biological weapons proving ground, where every surface, every shadow, every breath of air could be contaminated with something designed to turn them into hosts. The discovery of additional sublevels presented both an opportunity and a nightmare. Opportunity because those deeper levels might contain research data more complete than what they'd already found. Evidence that could prove North Korea's violation of international biological weapons treaties and justify military intervention. Nightmare, because those deeper levels also represented unknown territory, filled with God knows how many infected hosts, active swarms, and quite possibly experimental variants that made the specimens they'd already encountered look tame by comparison. Captain Kang made the tactical decision that protocols and training demanded. We go deeper. We find the primary research archive. We document everything. And we extract with evidence sufficient to bring this nightmare to international attention. Because if we leave without proof, if we go back and tell them what we saw without hard data to back it up, they'll classify this as combat stress hallucination and nothing changes. Those things stay here breeding and eventually they find their own way across the border. Sergeant Beck immediately objected. Sir, with respect, we have a man down. We're cut off from command. We're inside a facility that's been converted into a fucking hive, and you want to go deeper? Kang's response was cold and precise. We're special operations. We don't have the luxury of rational fear. We do what needs doing regardless of cost, and right now what needs doing is collecting evidence that North Korea has created something that could end human civilization if it gets loose. So yes, Sergeant, we go deeper. And if any man in this room wants to file an objection when we get back, assuming we get back, I'll personally submit it to command along with my own court-martial papers for leading this operation. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds before every man checked his weapon, verified his ammunition count, and formed up in breach formation, because that's what professional soldiers do when given orders that will likely kill them. They follow those orders with discipline and precision, trusting that their training and their brothers in arms will see them through, even when every survival instinct screams at them to run. even when they know intellectually that they're probably marching toward their own graves. Because the mission matters more than the individual, and the world outside this facility needs to know what nightmare has been born in this underground laboratory before that nightmare breaches containment and spreads beyond the point where it can ever be stopped. The descent to the sublevels required navigating a service stairwell that spiraled downward through the facility's core, and the team moved in tactical column formation with Sergeant back on point, his thermal scope cutting through the darkness, revealing a disturbing pattern. Every 10 meters of descent, the temperature dropped by precisely 1 degree Celsius, suggesting either the facility's climate control was still functioning on some automated protocol, or something below was generating cold, drawing heat downward, creating an environment more suitable for incubation or preservation. The walls of the stairwell showed signs of frantic activity during the evacuation. Bullet impacts from small arms fire suggesting the facility's security forces had engaged something in this confined space, blood splatter patterns indicating hits on organic targets. But more disturbing were the impact patterns on the ceiling, showing that whatever they'd been shooting at had been attacking from above, clinging to overhead surfaces, diving down at the fleeing personnel with enough aggression to force them to waste ammunition, shooting at angles that violated every principle of tactical firearms training. They found the first body at the landing between levels 2 and 3, a North Korean soldier in full combat gear, his Type 88 assault rifle still clutched in hands that had gone rigid with rigor, mortise his body positioned in a defensive crouch facing upward toward the ceiling. And when Sergeant Park examined the corpse, he found 17 separate puncture wounds concentrated along the neck, shoulders, and upper back, meaning this man had been swarmed, had been attacked by multiple wasps simultaneously, had been implanted with potentially dozens of larvae, though the body showed no signs of emergence wounds, suggesting he died from massive envenomation or perhaps cardiac arrest before the larvae had time to mature, which raised a terrifying question. If the implantation was a quick injection process, how many wasps had attacked this man that the sheer volume of venom had killed him before the parasites could complete their life cycle? Sub-level 3 opened into what had clearly been the primary research archive, a climate-controlled vault with floor-to-ceiling filing cabinets and secured server banks, and miraculously the electronic systems were still powered, still functional, apparently running on an independent backup generator that had survived whatever chaos had consumed the upper levels. Corporal Min immediately moved to the nearest terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he bypassed security protocols with practiced ease, and what emerged from the archived files painted a picture of systematic horror that had been developing for nearly 15 years. The Prohetogicium, the Stinging, had begun in 2008 as a theoretical research initiative exploring the weaponization of parasitic insects, initially focused on developing vectors for delivering conventional toxins or infectious agents. But everything changed in 2015 when North Korean intelligence services acquired, through methods the documents didn't specify, but which certainly involved espionage and possibly assassination, complete research data on CRISPR gene editing technology from a Chinese military bioweapons laboratory in Harbin. The breakthrough came in 2017 when senior researcher Dr. Pak Chol-soo successfully integrated genetic material from 3 distinct organisms into the base Ichneumonidae wasp genome, genes from Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, the zombie fungus that controls ant behavior, genes from Toxoplasma gondii, the parasite that alters fear responses in mammals, and genes from Dicrocoelium dendriticum, the lancet liver fluke that drives its hosts to elevated positions to facilitate transmission, creating a chimera organism that possessed all 3 behavioral control mechanisms while maintaining the parasitic wasp's natural reproductive cycle. The documents contained video files, hundreds of them, each one documenting a different phase of testing, and Min began playing them on his helmet display, while simultaneously uploading them to the team's secured data storage, his voice providing running commentary that grew increasingly strained as the content became more horrific. Test 34 dated June 2019, subject is a domestic pig, approximately 80 kilograms wasp implantation at 800 hours. Subject shows first behavioral changes at 1400 hours, 6 hours post-implantation, stops feeding, becomes aggressive when approached. 1800 hours, 12 hours post. Subject attempts to climb walls of pen, fails but continues trying. shows complete disregard for injuries sustained. 2,000 hours, 14 hours post, subject becomes docile, stops moving, position itself in corner of pen facing away from light source. 800 hours following day, 24 hours post, emergence phase. 4 adult wasps exit through puncture sites in subject's neck and shoulder. Subject expires from hemorrhagic shock. Jesus Christ, they documented everything. They knew exactly what this thing would do. The files revealed that human testing had begun in March 2021, using political prisoners from Camp 16, the classified detention facility near Hwasong, with Dr. Unsung Chul himself, the same name they'd seen on that corpse upstairs, serving as the primary researcher overseeing human trials, and the documentation showed a level of clinical detachment that transformed atrocity into spreadsheet data. Subject H01 through H22 all showed consistent response patterns, with behavioral modification beginning at 6 hours post-implantation, complete neural control achieved by 18 hours, and successful emergence of 4 to 7 viable adult specimens at the 24-hour mark, with host survival rate during the full cycle hovering at 12%, meaning most subjects died during emergence, though the documents noted with disturbing enthusiasm that host survival is not necessary for successful propagation. Death of host after emergence is acceptable outcome and may be preferential as it prevents potential immune response development. The truly nightmarish revelation came in a classified addendum dated January 2023, just 2 months before the facility's evacuation, describing successful genetic modification that allowed the wasps to recognize specific pheromone markers in human sweat, making them preferentially target non-Korean ethnic groups, specifically engineering them to be more aggressive toward individuals of Japanese, Chinese, or American genetic background, turning them into a precision ethnic bioweapon that could theoretically be deployed in border regions or enemy territory, where they would specifically target foreign military personnel, while showing reduced aggression toward Korean hosts. Though the document acknowledged this selectivity was inconsistent under field conditions and requires further refinement. Corporal Kim, listening to Min's report through the tactical net, summed up what everyone was thinking. They built a weapon that recognizes race, that hunts specific ethnic groups. That's not just a war crime. That's genocidal intent with insect vectors. This is extinction-level threat if it gets weaponized at scale. The archive contained one final category of files, marked with the highest classification level and encrypted with multiple layers of security that took Corporal Min nearly 8 minutes to break through. And when he finally accessed the contents, what he found made him stop speaking entirely for 15 seconds, just staring at his display while his breathing became rapid and shallow, until Captain Kang demanded a status report and Min's voice came back over the radio, trembling with barely controlled panic. "Sir, there's a deployment plan here. Operation Tongnip Mubang, Unification through Infestation, dated for execution in June 2023, 3 months from now. The plan calls for releasing modified wasps in specific locations across the DMZ where South Korean military patrols are scheduled to operate. The wasps would implant South Korean soldiers who would then return to their bases, undergo transformation during standard duty cycles, and the emerged specimens would spread through military installations, then into nearby civilian populations. Projections estimate 40% infection rate of South Korean military within 2 weeks, 15% of Seoul's metropolitan population within 30 days, complete societal collapse within 90 days, after which North Korean forces would advance south under the pretense of providing humanitarian aid, effectively conquering the South by first transforming it into an incubator for weapons that would have already destroyed organized resistance. The silence that followed this revelation was absolute, broken only by breathing and the distant sound of that eternal hum echoing through ventilation shafts. Because what Min had just described wasn't a battle plan. It was an apocalypse scenario, a methodical blueprint for destroying an entire nation by turning its own population into breeding grounds for biological weapons. And the only thing that had prevented this nightmare from being executed was the containment failure that had trapped the wasps inside this facility, instead of allowing them to be deployed as planned. Meaning, in a horrifying way, the accident that had killed everyone in this base had actually saved millions of lives by keeping these things contained for 3 more weeks, while North Korean High Command decided what to do about their failed experiment. The archive's revelation was interrupted by a sound that made every man's blood freeze. Corporal Lee Dongmin's voice coming through the tactical net. But wrong, the tone flat and effectless, the cadence mechanical, speaking words that didn't sound like they were coming from Lee's consciousness, but rather being read from a script by something using his vocal cords as an instrument. They're coming now. I can hear them in the walls. They're excited. They can smell us. They know we found their home. Captain Kang spun toward where Lee had been standing near the archive entrance, but the young corporal was no longer there. Had moved during the minutes they'd been focused on the files, had somehow crossed 15 meters of open space without anyone noticing, despite the team's training and tactical awareness, and was now standing in the doorway leading to the stairwell, his body positioned in a way that blocked their primary exit route, his head tilted at an angle that was just slightly too far to be natural, approximately 45 degrees, exposing the side of his neck where the puncture wound had become something worse. The flesh around it had turned completely black, necrotic tissue spreading in a circular pattern roughly 8 centimeters in diameter, and beneath that dead skin, movement was clearly visible. Multiple lumps that shifted and pressed against the inside of the flesh like fingers pushing against a rubber membrane from the inside. And Lee's eyes, oh God, his eyes. The pupils were so dilated that almost no iris remained visible, just black pools that reflected their lights with an almost insect-like sheen, compound and multifaceted, as if whatever was growing inside him was already beginning to physically alter his visual processing organs to better suit its own needs. Sergeant Park moved toward Lee with his medic's instinct to help, but Captain Kang's hand shot out and grabbed Park's shoulder with enough force to stop him physically. That's not Lee anymore. Look at how he's standing. That's not a human posture, that's something else using his body. And indeed, Lee's weight distribution was wrong. Too much weight forward on his toes, his knees slightly bent, his arms held away from his body, a stance that resembled a sprinter preparing to launch or a predator preparing to pounce, not a wounded soldier seeking help from his brothers. When Lee spoke again, the words came out with that same mechanical precision. The Hive knows you took their memories. The Hive is angry that you saw their plans. The Hive has decided that you will serve a better purpose than just dying here. You will carry our children back to your bases. You will spread our gift to your commanders. You will help us fulfill what our creators planned. The way Lee referred to the swarm as the Hive, with almost religious reverence, the way he said our instead of their, confirmed what the medical scans had already suggested. Lee was no longer an individual consciousness temporarily hosting parasites. He had been absorbed into a collective intelligence. His neural pathways hijacked so completely that his sense of self had been subsumed into the Hive's distributed consciousness, and what stood before them wearing Lee's face and uniform was essentially a remote-controlled drone made of meat and bone, still technically alive, but serving the swarm's agenda rather than any human will. Lieutenant Han raised his weapon, putting Lee's center mass in his sights, and the thing wearing Lee's body smiled, an expression that didn't reach the eyes, a mechanical stretching of facial muscles that approximated human emotion without containing any actual feeling behind it, and it spoke one final time before all hell broke loose. You can kill this body, but it changes nothing. There are 37 more like me still moving through these corridors. 37 of our Creator's staff who received the gift before you arrived, and they are all converging on this position now. And the Hive has decided that 4 of you will be taken alive for implantation, and 4 of you will die here to feed the newly emerged, and the choice of which 4 become hosts and which 4 become food will be determined by how well you fight. The attack came from multiple vectors simultaneously in a coordinated assault that demonstrated tactical planning far beyond what any insect species should possess. The ventilation grate above their position exploded outward in a shower of metal fragments as dozens of wasps poured through the opening like a liquid stream of red and black chitin, their collective hum combining into a sound so painful that Corporal Choi actually screamed and dropped to his knees, clutching his head. The stairwell behind Lee erupted with movement as 3 figures emerged from the darkness, human-shaped but moving wrong, their gait stiff and lurching, their arms held at unnatural angles. And as they entered the light, the team could see that these had been North Korean personnel, scientists and soldiers, but each bore the telltale signs of advanced infestation, their necks and shoulders swollen with masses that pressed against the skin from inside, their eyes filmed over with the same dilated emptiness that had claimed Lee. their mouths hanging open in slack expressions that suggested higher brain function had completely ceased. Captain Kang's tactical training took over despite the nightmare unfolding around him, his voice cutting through the chaos with sharp command authority. Bulge, thermite charges on all ventilation access points. I don't care if you bring the ceiling down, seal those entry vectors. Orangi, controlled fire on the hostiles in the stairwell, headshots only. Do not hit their torsos where the larvae are concentrated. Agui, Naxion suppressing fire on the swarm. Make them prioritize evasion over attack. Seulgi, grab everything you can carry from those servers. We need that data. Medayup, you're with me. We're breaching through that wall to the adjacent corridor. Lieutenant Han moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd spent 15 years learning how to make things explode, placing shaped thermite charges on 3 ventilation grates while wasps dive-bombed his position, his hands steady despite insects striking his helmet and body armor with audible impacts. And when he triggered the charges, the magnesium ignition produced white-hot flames exceeding 2,200 degrees Celsius that instantly incinerated any wasp caught in the blast radius and sealed the ducts with molten metal, buying them perhaps 30 seconds before the swarm found alternate routes. Sergeant Bayek's precision marksmanship proved its worth as he put 3 rounds through the skull of the first infected host, the body dropping instantly, no longer animated by the neural hijacking that had kept it mobile. But the moment it hit the floor, the masses beneath its skin erupted in a frenzy of movement, and the team watched in horror as the skin split open and 4 wasps crawled out from the chest cavity, covered in viscous fluids but immediately mobile, immediately aggressive, immediately launching themselves toward new targets with what seemed like fury at having their incubation interrupted. Corporal Kim and Choi opened fire with their suppressed carbines, not aiming for specific targets but rather creating a wall of lead that forced the main swarm to disperse and seek cover, and the sight of insects exhibiting tactical defensive behavior, actually using cover and concealment principles, demonstrated intelligence that violated every principle of entomology, because these things were learning, were adapting, were applying military tactics. They must have absorbed somehow from the memories or neural patterns of their human hosts, suggesting that the neural connection went both ways, that when the larvae fed on brain tissue and hijacked neural pathways, they also absorbed information, learned from their hosts' knowledge and experiences. Corporal Min worked feverishly at the server terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard while wasps dive-bombed his position, and he batted them away with his free hand, successfully downloading 3 terabytes of classified research data onto portable drives that he stuffed into his tactical vest. And he was reaching for a 4th drive when pain lanced through his shoulder, sharp and burning, and he looked down to see one of the wasps clinging to his body armor, its stinger having found the gap between his shoulder plate and collar protection, having punched through the thin fabric and into the soft tissue of his trapezius muscle. And Min's scream was immediate and involuntary as the insect injected its payload. 2 full seconds of burning agony that felt like molten metal being poured directly into his nervous system, before he managed to grab the wasp and crush it between his gloved hands, feeling the exoskeleton crunch and split, viscous fluids coating his gloves. But the damage was done. He'd been implanted. Whatever terrible gift these things carried was now inside him, burrowing through his tissue, seeking his spine, his brain, and the timer had started on his remaining time as a human being. Captain Kang saw Min go down, saw the wasp crushed in his hand, understood immediately what had happened, and made the instant tactical calculation that every special operations leader dreads. How many men can I afford to lose before the mission becomes unsalvageable? They now had 2 infected team members, Lee, who was already at 6 hours and showing advanced behavioral modification, and Min, who had just been implanted and still had perhaps 5 hours of reliable human function remaining. They'd lost the element of surprise. They were fighting in an enclosed space against an enemy that outnumbered them potentially thousands to 1, and their extraction route was compromised. But they had the evidence, had documentation of crimes against humanity that could justify international military intervention, and that evidence mattered more than 8 lives, mattered more than comfort or safety or survival. Captain Kang triggered the breaching charge that Lieutenant Han had hastily placed against the archive's rear wall. the shaped explosive punching through 30 centimeters of reinforced concrete and creating an opening large enough for the team to move through in single file. And they poured into the adjacent corridor in tactical sequence, dragging Corporal Min, whose shoulder wound was already showing signs of rapid tissue necrosis, the flesh around the puncture site turning purple-black and radiating heat that Sergeant Park could feel through his gloves, indicating an inflammatory response far more aggressive than any natural venom should produce, suggesting the injected payload contained not just larvae and behavioral toxins, but also enzymes designed to pre-digest surrounding tissue to create an optimal feeding environment for the developing parasites. They sealed the breach behind them with a thermite charge that fused the concrete into a temporary barrier, buying perhaps 2 minutes before the swarm found alternate routes. And in those precious seconds of relative safety, Park performed a field examination of Min's wound that confirmed their worst fears. The medical scanner showed 3 distinct masses, each approximately 3 millimeters in length, already migrating along nerve pathways toward Min's spine, moving with purposeful direction at a speed of roughly 1 centimeter per minute, meaning they had perhaps 20 minutes before the larvae reached his central nervous system and began the neural hijacking process that would transform him from teammate to enemy. Min himself remained lucid and aware, his training allowing him to compartmentalize the pain and terror, and he looked Captain Kang directly in the eyes and spoke with absolute clarity. "Sir, I know the protocols. I know what happens at the 6-hour mark. I'm asking you right now while I'm still me to promise that you'll put a bullet in my brainstem before you let me become like Leak. Before you let these things use my body to attack my brothers, I'd rather die human than live as a puppet for those fucking insects." Kang gripped Min's shoulder, careful to avoid the wound site, and gave him the only answer a commander could give. "You have my word when the time comes. It'll be quick and clean, but until that moment arrives, you're still an operator in this unit, and you'll continue functioning in whatever capacity you can. Understood?" Min nodded, checked his weapon, verified his ammunition count, and stood up with visible effort. Because that's what professional soldiers do when they know they're already dead. They continue the mission with whatever time remains. They make their deaths matter for something larger than themselves. The corridor they'd breached into was different from the upper levels. The architecture older, the construction more primitive, suggesting these deepest sections of the facility had been built decades earlier, possibly during the Cold War era, when North Korea had undertaken massive underground construction projects with Soviet technical assistance, and the walls here were bare rock face reinforced with steel supports, the ceiling lower and more oppressive, creating a claustrophobic. They advanced in a modified column formation, with Sergeant Bayek on point using his thermal scope to detect heat signatures. But what the scope revealed made no tactical sense. Cold spots, areas where the ambient temperature dropped by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius in localized pockets, and these cold zones were moving, flowing through the corridor like invisible currents of Arctic air. And when Bayek reported this anomaly, Corporal Choi's technical expertise provided a horrifying explanation. "Sir, those cold spots are the swarm, massed groups of wasps flying in tight formation. Their collective body heat is somehow lower than ambient temperature, which violates basic thermodynamics unless they're actively cooling themselves through some biological mechanism. Possibly evaporative cooling using the fluids from their hosts' bodies, which would mean they're covered in human blood, and tissue fluid that's evaporating off their exoskeletons. Essentially, they're flying around wearing the liquefied remains of their victims." The image this conjured was so viscerally disturbing that even hardened special operations soldiers felt their stomachs turn the idea that these insects were literally bathing in the biological matter of the people they'd consumed, using human fluids as a cooling mechanism to enhance their flight performance and predatory efficiency. The swarm's return came not with the chaotic aggression of their previous encounters, but rather with methodical precision that demonstrated learning and adaptation, suggesting a collective intelligence that could analyze previous attack patterns, identify what had worked and what had failed, and modify tactics accordingly. Instead of pouring through ventilation grates in masses that could be suppressed with gunfire, the wasps now emerged from the darkness ahead and behind in loose formations that spread across the full width and height of the corridor, making it impossible to create effective suppressing fire without wasting ammunition. Each insect maintaining spacing that prevented a single burst from hitting multiple targets. Instead of diving directly at exposed skin where body armor created obstacles, the wasps now demonstrated knowledge of human equipment vulnerabilities, specifically targeting the gaps at joints, the thin fabric at the back of the knee, the exposed areas where tactical vests connected to belts, the small openings where helmets met collar protection, showing tactical awareness that should have required human-level intelligence to recognize and exploit. Lieutenant Han deployed another thermite charge, but before he could trigger it, 3 wasps dove directly at his hand holding the detonator, not stinging, but rather using their bodies as kinetic projectiles to impact his fingers and knock the device from his grasp, the detonator skittering across the floor toward the advancing swarm, and Han's voice came through the radio net with barely controlled fury. They're not just attacking, they're thinking. They saw the detonator, recognized it as a threat, and deliberately targeted it. These things are operating with human-level problem-solving capacity. The corridor opened into a larger chamber that had clearly been designed as some kind of central hub, with multiple passages branching off in 6 directions. And as the team entered this space, their lights illuminated something that made every man stop moving. Training and discipline momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer biological horror before them. The chamber had been transformed into what could only be described as a hive structure, but not an insect hive, rather something that combined insect architecture with mammalian biology in ways that should not exist in nature. The walls were covered in a substance that resembled wax, but had a distinctly organic texture, translucent enough to show fibrous structures beneath, and when Sergeant Park cautiously touched it with his gloved hand, the material was warm, approximately body temperature, and it pulsed with a rhythm that matched human heartbeat, suggesting it was somehow constructed from processed human tissue, possibly the remains of the facility's original personnel, who had been not just killed but converted into raw biological material to construct this nightmare architecture. Suspended throughout the chamber in cocoon-like structures were approximately 20 bodies, each one wrapped in that same translucent material that was tight enough to show the forms inside. And these forms were recognizably human in shape, but wrong in subtle ways. The proportions slightly off. Limbs positioned at angles that suggested the skeleton beneath had been somehow reorganized. And the most disturbing aspect was that these bodies were moving. Shallow respiration, visible heads occasionally turning, suggesting that whatever transformation they were undergoing, they remained alive throughout the process, conscious, perhaps aware of what was being done to them, even as their bodies were systematically converted into something that served the hive's purposes rather than their own survival. In the center of the chamber stood a structure that resembled a throne or perhaps an altar, constructed from that same biological material, but more elaborate, more deliberately shaped, and seated upon it was a figure that had once been human, but had undergone transformation so extensive that humanity remained only as a suggestion in its basic bipedal form. The body had swollen to perhaps twice normal size. The skin stretched tight over masses that moved beneath with coordinated purpose, and the entire torso had split open vertically from throat to pelvis. The rib cage spread wide like some obscene flower, and within that gaping cavity, thousands upon thousands of wasps moved in organized patterns, crawling over each other, attending to structures that looked like vastly enlarged versions of insect larvae, each one the size of a human forearm, pulsating with life as they fed on tissue that the host body continuously generated, essentially converting this person into a living factory that existed solely to produce more wasps, a queen of sorts, but still technically alive, still possessing human eyes that tracked the team's entrance with an awareness that suggested consciousness had not completely fled, even as the body had been repurposed into an organic incubator operating at industrial scale. Corporal Kim's composure, legendary throughout the 707th for its unshakable nature even under extreme combat stress, finally cracked as he stared at the living throne, his voice coming through the tactical net as a strangled whisper. "That's not possible. That can't be real. The human body can't survive that level of trauma. The shock alone should have killed them. This violates everything we know about biology and medicine and basic fucking reality." Sergeant Park's medical training provided answers that only deepened the horror. The larvae must secrete something that keeps the host alive despite catastrophic damage, probably a combination of anticoagulants to prevent fatal bleeding, shock suppressants to maintain blood pressure, and some kind of tissue regeneration factor that allows continuous harvesting of biological material without killing the host. Essentially, they've turned this person into a renewable resource, a living farm that produces both food for the larvae and construction material for the hive structure. And based on the level of development I'm seeing, this transformation probably took the full 3 weeks since the facility's evacuation, meaning this person has been conscious and aware for 21 days of being slowly converted into a biological factory. The implication that consciousness might persist throughout such a transformation broke something fundamental in the human psyche's ability to process horror, because death was one thing. Even painful death could be endured knowing it would eventually end, but to remain alive and aware while your body was systematically converted into something inhuman, to feel yourself being hollowed out and rebuilt, to watch your own flesh betray you and serve alien purposes that represented a fate genuinely worse than death, a violation so complete that it destroyed not just the body but the very concept of self. Corporal Lee, who had been moving with the team since the breach but maintaining distance at Captain Kang's orders, suddenly stopped walking, his body going rigid, his head tilting at that unnatural angle again, and when he spoke, his voice had changed completely, no longer even attempting to sound human, speaking directly through him. You see our cathedral, you witness our mother's transformation, you understand now what we offer, not death but purpose, not extinction but transcendence. We take your weak individual consciousness and absorb it into collective awareness. We take your fragile flesh and make it serve the eternal swarm. We are what comes after humanity. We are the next step in evolution, and you will help us spread. The casual way Lee's body spoke about humanity in past tense, the complete absence of fear or doubt in that multi-voice, the absolute certainty that human resistance was futile and temporary, struck at something primal in the team's psychology, because soldiers could fight enemies that wanted to kill them, could maintain discipline against opponents that sought their destruction. But how did you fight something that wanted to assimilate you, that viewed your death not as victory but as waste of useful biological resources, that saw your body not as an enemy to eliminate, but as raw material to harvest and convert? Captain Kang's response was to raise his weapon and put 3 rounds through Lee's center mass, the suppressed gunshots producing sharp cracks in the chamber's acoustic environment, and Lee's body stumbled backward and fell, but even as it hit the ground, the thing speaking through him continued talking. The voice now coming from the swarm itself, thousands of wasps producing that same multitonal chorus. You cannot kill what exists as distributed consciousness. Destroying one node changes nothing. We are in the walls in the air in your teammate's body. Even now, we are inevitable as gravity, as time, as entropy itself. Corporal Min dropped to his knees as the 6-hour mark approached, his hands clutching at his head, and the team could see the internal struggle playing out across his features as the behavioral modification toxins began affecting his neural chemistry, his pupils dilating and contracting in irregular patterns, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow, sweat pouring down his face despite the cold ambient temperature. And he was fighting, using every ounce of willpower and training to maintain control of his own mind, even as something else tried to seize the controls, and his voice when he spoke was strained and desperate. I can feel them. I can feel them in my head. It's like thoughts that aren't mine, suggestions that feel like they're coming from my own brain, but I know they're not. Park moved to Min's side, his medical scanner showing catastrophic neural activity. The larvae had reached Min's brainstem and were beginning to integrate with his nervous system, secreting chemicals that were actively rewriting his neural pathways, not destroying consciousness, but rather redirecting it, shaping it, converting independent thought into collective purpose. And Park looked at Captain Kang with an expression of helpless horror, because there was nothing in his medical training that addressed how to treat parasitic neural hijacking at this advanced stage. No drugs that could cross the blood-brain barrier fast enough to counteract the larvae's chemical assault. No surgical procedure that could be performed in a combat environment to extract organisms that had already integrated with spinal tissue. The offer of transcendence was punctuated by the chamber's 6 exits simultaneously sealing themselves, not with doors but rather with living barriers, as hundreds of wasps clustered at each opening and began secreting that organic wax material at accelerated rates, the substance hardening in real time to create walls that grew centimeter by centimeter, cutting off escape routes with biological architecture that was being constructed faster than humanly possible, suggesting that the hive had been planning this moment, had deliberately herded the team into this specific chamber because it represented an ideal trap, a killing ground that could be sealed and flooded with wasps until every human inside had been implanted and converted, turning the team's own defensive instincts against them by making them seek shelter in the exact location where they would be most vulnerable. Captain Kang's tactical assessment took perhaps 2 seconds. They were surrounded, outnumbered by thousands to one, cut off from extraction, operating with 2 compromised team members, limited ammunition, and facing an enemy that demonstrated intelligence and adaptability that made conventional combat doctrine useless. And the only asset they still possessed was the data drives in Corporal Min's vest. 3 terabytes of documentation that could prove to the world what had been created here, and justify the level of military response necessary to sterilize this entire region before the infestation spread beyond containment. The decision came with the clarity that only arrives in moments of absolute crisis. "Bulgy, you still have thermite charges." Lieutenant Han's response was immediate. "4 charges remaining, sir. Enough to bring this entire section down if we place them on the support columns." Kang's next words would define the mission's outcome and cost. "Then we complete the mission the only way left available to us. We document what we've seen. We transmit every piece of evidence to command, even if it means burning through our encryption and revealing our position to every DPRK monitoring station within 100 kilometers. And then we purge this chamber with fire hot enough to sterilize everything organic within it. And if some of us don't make it out before the charges blow, then we don't make it out. But this nightmare dies here, in this room, today. And that matters more than 8 lives." The plan's execution required perfect coordination in an environment of absolute chaos. Lieutenant Han moved through the chamber, placing charges on 4 primary support columns, working with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd spent 15 years learning to make structures fall in precisely calculated ways, while Sergeant Baek and Corporal Kim provided covering fire, not aiming to kill individual wasps, but rather creating continuous suppressing fire that forced the swarm to disperse and seek cover, buying Han precious seconds at each column placement. Corporal Choi worked frantically with his communications equipment, stripping away every encryption layer, abandoning all operational security protocols, and broadcasting raw, unencrypted data files directly to Roque military satellites that orbited overhead every 93 minutes, burning through 3 years' worth of classified signals intelligence procedures, in the desperate hope that at least some of the transmission would be received and recorded before North Korean electronic warfare assets triangulated their position and jammed the signal. Sergeant Park stayed with Corporal Min, whose behavioral modification had reached critical stage, the young soldier's body convulsing as the internal struggle between human consciousness and hive control reached its climax, Min's voice alternating between his own desperate pleas to kill me now while I'm still me, and the hive's multi-tonal chorus trying to speak through him, promising peace and purpose and an end to the pain of individual existence, his hands clawing at his own neck as if trying to physically rip out the larvae that were converting his brain tissue into a neural node for collective consciousness. Lieutenant Han completed placement of the 3rd charge and was moving toward the 4th column when the swarm finally overwhelmed his defenses, a dozen wasps landing on him simultaneously, their stingers punching through his tactical suit at joints and gaps, and Han's scream cut through the chaos as he felt multiple injections, multiple larvae being deposited into his tissue, and he knew with absolute certainty that he'd just been converted from savior to vector, from operator to incubator, and his training and discipline allowed him to make the calculation instantly. He was compromised. He had perhaps 5 hours before behavioral modification began, but he also had 3 thermite charges remaining, and 1 remote detonator, and a compromised operator could still complete a demolition mission if he was willing to stay behind when the charges blew. Han's voice came through the radio net with perfect calm despite his situation. "Sir, I'm hit multiple stings. I can feel at least 6 separate punctures. I'm combat ineffective for extraction, but I can still place the final charge and trigger the sequence requesting permission to remain behind and ensure demolition is complete." The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds, 3 seconds of every man understanding what Han was asking permission to do, and Captain Kang's response carried the weight of command decisions that no training could fully prepare you for. Permission granted, Bulga. You place that final charge. You set the timer for 2 minutes and you make sure these things burn. And when you get to wherever soldiers go after they fall, you tell them that Lieutenant Han Su-wan died saving his country from a threat they'll never even know existed, and that matters, that fucking matters. Han moved toward the fourth column with movements that were already becoming slightly stiff as the larvae began their work. His hands steady, despite knowing he was placing the device that would kill him. And he set the timer with deliberate care, checking it twice, making absolutely certain that 2 minutes would give his team enough time to breach one of the bio walls and escape while still being fast enough that the hive couldn't dismantle his charges. And as he armed the sequence, he turned to face his brothers one last time and gave them the thumbs up that special operations soldiers use to signal mission complete. And then he sat down with his back against the column, pulled out a photograph of his wife and infant son that he kept in his vest pocket, and waited for the fire that would end his nightmare before the transformation could truly begin. Captain Kang made the tactical decision that survival required abandoning standard breach procedures. Agui, you're our breaching specialist. I need that bio wall open in 90 seconds. I don't care if you have to punch through it with your bare hands. We move or we die. Corporal Kim pulled his combat knife, approached the nearest sealed exit, and began cutting into the organic material with savage determination, the substance proving surprisingly resistant, requiring multiple cuts to penetrate through the layers that were several centimeters thick and had the consistency of cartilage mixed with hardened wax. And as he cut, wasps swarmed him, stinging repeatedly. But Kim had grown up in Busan's roughest neighborhoods where fighting was survival, and pain was just another opponent to overcome. And he continued cutting even as he felt multiple injections, even as he knew he was being implanted with the same nightmare that had claimed Lee and Han, because his brothers needed that exit and he would give it to them, even if it cost him everything. The bio wall finally gave way with 90 seconds remaining on Han's timer, splitting open in a ragged tear that led to a corridor beyond, and Captain Kang began pushing his team through. Move, move, move! Beck, take point. Noxion help made up with Sulgi. Agui, your rear guard. The team poured through the breach with desperate speed, carrying Corporal Min, whose consciousness was now fully gone, whose eyes had taken on that vacant, multifaceted gleam, whose mouth had begun speaking in the hive's voice. But they carried him anyway because even if the man was gone, the data drives in his vest represented the mission's success, represented proof that could justify intervention, represented meaning for every sacrifice they'd made in this underground hell. Corporal Kim came through last, his body bearing at least 8 separate puncture wounds, his movements already showing the stiffness that preceded behavioral modification. And as he turned to seal the breach behind them, he locked eyes with Lieutenant Han, who was still sitting against that column, still holding that photograph. And the two soldiers who had served together for 6 years shared a final nod of understanding and respect. The wordless communication of warriors who had chosen to die so their brothers could live. And then Kim slammed the bio wall material back into place using thermite from his own kit to fuse it shut, trapping themselves on one side and Han on the other, ensuring that when the charges blew, the explosion would be contained, would channel upward through the hive's structure, would create a fireball hot enough to sterilize every organic surface in that nightmare cathedral. The timer reached 0 as the team was running through the corridor toward the stairwell that led back to the upper levels, and even separated by walls and distance, they felt the explosion as a physical wave of pressure that knocked them off their feet. A thunderous detonation that was followed by the screaming rush of superheated air being forced through every duct and corridor. And they covered their heads as debris rained down and structural supports groaned with the stress of sudden load redistribution. When the immediate chaos subsided and they climbed back to their feet, Captain Kang looked back the way they'd come and saw orange light flickering through gaps in the walls, fire spreading through the lower levels, consuming everything, organic, converting the hive's biological architecture into ash and smoke. The team reached the ventilation shaft that had been their original entry point, 47 minutes after the thermite charges detonated in the lower levels, their lungs burning from smoke inhalation, their bodies bearing wounds both visible and microscopic, and their numbers reduced from 8 operators to 5 men still capable of independent thought and action. Corporal Min had stopped responding to verbal commands entirely at the 30-minute mark, his consciousness fully subsumed into the Hive Collective, requiring physical restraint from Sergeant Park and Sergeant Bayek to prevent him from turning back toward the burning lower levels, as if drawn by invisible strings toward something that no longer existed, except as ash and superheated metal. While Corporal Kim's behavioral modification had progressed to the point where he walked with that characteristic stiff gait, his head tilted at unnatural angles, his pupils dilated so wide that his eyes appeared completely black, though some fragment of human will still allowed him to continue moving toward extraction, rather than attacking his teammates, as if the soldier inside was fighting one final battle against the thing trying to take control of his nervous system. Captain Kang made the brutal calculation that extraction protocol demanded. They would rope climb the ventilation shaft with Min and Kim secured to harnesses and pulled by the others, treating them as equipment rather than autonomous team members. Because the data drives in Min's vest and the evidence of what they'd witnessed mattered more than the dignity of allowing infected soldiers to retain agency over their own movements during their final hours as human beings. The ascent took 12 minutes of exhausting physical effort, pulling 2 non-cooperative bodies up 30 meters of vertical shaft, while smoke billowed from below, and the facility's structural supports continued failing with sounds like artillery impacts. And when they finally emerged onto the surface into the cold night air of the DMZ's northern sector, the fog had lifted enough to see the stars, and that glimpse of normal sky after hours in that underground nightmare felt like emerging from hell itself. Though the hell had followed them out in the form of 2 infected teammates whose bodies would soon become incubators for the very horror they'd tried to destroy. They had covered perhaps 300 meters toward the southern border when the radio crackled with encrypted transmission from Arak Command, and the voice that came through belonged to Major General Yi Sung-ho, Deputy Commander of Intelligence Operations, whose presence on a tactical frequency meant that their unencrypted data transmission had been received and had gone straight to the highest levels of military command. Dokaibi, authenticate identity with code word from your original briefing. Captain Kang responded with the proper authentication, and the general's next words carried the weight of decisions already made at levels far above Special Operations pay grade. Your transmission was received, analyzed, and has been classified under National Security Act Article 47, Cosmic Level Restriction. Effective immediately, a QRF flight is inbound to your position with instructions to extract all personnel and ensure complete sterilization of the operational area. ETA 6 minutes. Mark your position with IR strobe and prepare for immediate dust-off. And Captain, be advised that the sterilization protocol includes thermobaric ordnance sufficient to create a pressure wave that will collapse all underground structures within a 2-kilometer radius and superheat the area to temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Celsius. Nothing organic will survive within the target zone. The implications were clear. Command had decided that even the risk of a single wasp escaping containment was unacceptable, that the entire facility and everything in it needed to be reduced to molten slag. That evidence would be destroyed along with the threat, and that the official record would show nothing more than a standard reconnaissance patrol that encountered enemy action and requested fire support. Captain Kang looked at his remaining team. Sergeant Beck and Sergeant Park were battered but functional. Corporal Choi was deaf from ruptured eardrums and bleeding from multiple lacerations but mobile. Corporal Min was completely gone, his body animated by hive consciousness that made him strain against his restraints and speak in that multi-tonal chorus about how the fire only killed one cathedral. The hive exists in many places. The transcendence cannot be stopped by conventional weapons. And Corporal Kim stood apart from the group, his body language suggesting internal struggle, human consciousness still fighting against neural hijacking. And in a moment of heartbreaking lucidity, Kim looked at Captain Kang and spoke in a voice that was still recognizably his own. "Sir, I can feel them moving inside me. I can feel my thoughts becoming their thoughts in maybe 2 hours. I won't be me anymore, and I'm asking you as your soldier and your friend, don't let me get on that helicopter. Don't let me bring this back to our side of the border. You promised Min a clean death, and I'm asking for the same courtesy." The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder, the distinctive rotor wash of UH-60 Blackhawks modified for special operations insertion, and Captain Kang faced the most difficult command decision of his 17-year career: follow orders and extract all personnel, including 2 infected soldiers who would need to be quarantined and studied, potentially spreading the infestation. If containment protocols failed, or make the tactical call that the mission's success required, ensuring absolutely zero risk of the parasites crossing into South Korean territory, even if that meant executing 2 of his own men in the field. He looked at Corporal Kim, at the young operator who had breached walls with his bare hands to save his brothers, who had taken multiple stings knowing they would kill him, who was using his last minutes of human consciousness to make the rational military decision that his compromised body represented an unacceptable security risk. And Kang made the call that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Mayday up, Horangi. Take Min and Kim to that depression 30 meters north, the blast crater from an old artillery strike. And you make it quick and clean like we promised, headshots at close range so they don't suffer. And then you get back here for extraction, because that thermobaric strike is coming whether we're clear or not. The next 4 minutes unfolded with the mechanical precision of men performing duties that destroyed something fundamental in their souls. Sergeant Park and Sergeant Bayek led Min and Kim to the designated location, Min still speaking in the Hive's voice about transcendence and evolution, Kim walking calmly and with dignity toward his own execution, and the 2 suppressed gunshots that followed were barely audible over the helicopter noise, but each one hit the remaining team members like physical blows. The knowledge that they'd just killed their own brothers, killed men who had fought beside them and saved their lives, killed soldiers who deserved medals, not bullets. But the mission required it, survival required it, protecting their nation from a nightmare required it, and that burden would be carried by the survivors for whatever years remained to them. The extraction helicopter touched down with rotors still turning, combat medics jumping out to assist the wounded, and as Captain Kang climbed aboard with his 3 remaining operators, he looked back at the facility entrance they'd emerged from, now just a dark hole in the hillside surrounded by the fog-shrouded landscape of the DMZ, and Kang keyed his radio to the pilot. Get us airborne now, and tell command to execute that thermobaric strike immediately. Do not wait for us to reach minimum safe distance, light it up now. The helicopter lifted off with emergency acceleration, and 30 seconds later, the night turned to day as cruise missiles struck the facility from above, their thermobaric warheads detonating in sequence to create a firestorm that consumed oxygen for hundreds of meters in all directions, the pressure wave collapsing underground tunnels and chambers, the heat flash incinerating anything organic within the blast radius. And the team watched from the helicopter's open door as the hillside that had concealed that nightmare simply ceased to exist, replaced by a crater still glowing with residual heat. And Captain Kang allowed himself one moment of hope that maybe, possibly, they had contained it, that the mission's terrible cost had purchased security for the millions who would never know how close they'd come to extinction. Though deep in his gut, in that place where combat veterans learned to trust their instincts, he suspected that hope was a lie. They told themselves to make the losses bearable, that somewhere in the darkness beyond that blast radius, something with compound eyes and red-striped chitin was flying south toward the border, carrying inside its body the genetic code for humanity's replacement, waiting patiently for the next opportunity to deliver its terrible gift to an unsuspecting world. The official military record of Operation Cheonsa 47 was sanitized within 72 hours of the team's extraction. The original after-action reports shredded and replaced with documents describing a routine reconnaissance patrol that encountered North Korean border guards, engaged in brief firefight, and requested air support to suppress enemy positions, with casualties listed as Lieutenant Han Soo-won, killed in action by enemy fire. Corporals Kim Hyun-woo and Min Jae-won killed in action during extraction under fire. Cause of death recorded as gunshot wounds sustained during combat operations, their bodies listed as unrecoverable due to subsequent airstrikes on enemy positions. The 5 surviving operators were immediately separated upon landing at Osan Air Base, each man transported to different medical facilities across South Korea under armed guard, where they underwent 72 hours of intensive biological decontamination protocols that included full-body irradiation, chemical cleansing that stripped away the outer layers of their skin, and prophylactic treatment with every anti-parasitic medication in the military pharmacological database, treatments administered by medical personnel who had been told only that the operators had been exposed to unknown biological agents and who asked no questions because their security clearances didn't permit curiosity. Captain Kang Jae-sung was debriefed personally by Major General Yi Sung-ho in a facility that officially didn't exist, where he spent 11 days recounting every detail of the mission while polygraph equipment monitored his physiological responses. And at the conclusion of his debriefing, he was presented with documents that simultaneously awarded him the Taeguk Cordon of the Order of Military Merit, South Korea's highest decoration for valor, and bound him under Article 47 of the National Security Act to never speak of the operation's true nature, under penalty of life imprisonment for treason, meaning he would carry medals on his chest for actions he could never describe, honored publicly for a lie while the truth would remain locked in classified vaults. Sergeant Park Min-jae and Sergeant Baek Tae-hyun were transferred to different units within weeks. Park reassigned to medical instruction at the ROK Army Training Center, where his combat experience would be wasted, teaching basic first aid to recruits. Baek sent to a forward observation post on Baekneung Island, the isolated assignment effectively removing both men from any position where they might accidentally discuss their experiences with fellow special operations personnel. Corporal Choi Sung-min, whose ruptured eardrums resulted in 40% permanent hearing loss, was medically retired from military service with a pension and disability benefits, but his discharge papers made no mention of how he'd sustained his injuries, listing only acoustic trauma during training exercise, and he returned to civilian life in Daegu, where he took a job as a security guard and spent his nights drinking alone in his apartment. The data drives that Corporal Min had downloaded were analyzed by a joint team from the ROK National Intelligence Service, the Agency for Defense Development, and the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, their contents confirming that North Korea had successfully created a self-replicating biological weapon that combined parasitic reproduction with behavioral modification and demonstrated tactical intelligence, suggesting emergent consciousness in swarm formations representing a threat categorization that had no existing protocols for containment or response. The analysis concluded that even a single breeding pair escaping into civilian population centers could result in exponential growth curves that would overwhelm medical and military response capabilities within 30 days, and recommended immediate international pressure on North Korea to disclose all facilities involved in similar research, though diplomatic channels were never utilized because doing so would require admitting that South Korean forces had conducted illegal cross-border operations and possessed evidence obtained through violation of the Armistice Agreement. Instead, the United States quietly repositioned Reaper drone assets to maintain 24-hour surveillance of the bombed facility and surrounding regions with standing authorization to deploy Hellfire missiles on any thermal signatures matching swarm behavior patterns. The families of Lieutenant Han Corporal Kim and Corporal Min were told their loved ones had died heroes defending the nation's security, received full military honors at funerals where the coffins contained sandbags rather than bodies, and were awarded death benefits and survivor pensions. Don't forget to follow our channel for more military encounters. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into phenomena that defy everything we've been taught about reality. And subscribe to join our community of truth seekers who refuse to accept official explanations that ignore overwhelming evidence.